The Mitchell family had no reason to think June 12, 2010, would be anything but an ordinary summer day. The morning sun spilled across Eugene, Oregon, warming the damp grass of Alton Baker Park. The Willamette River shimmered nearby, carrying with it the mingled scents of water and pine. Ducks drifted lazily at the banks, joggers passed with headphones tucked into their ears, and families hauled coolers from trunks to picnic tables. For Linda Mitchell, the day felt like a chance to breathe. She'd packed turkey sandwiches, carrot sticks, homemade lemonade, and a small quilt patterned with blue checkers. Robert, her husband, had argued for a fishing trip, but Linda insisted on something simpler. "Let's just enjoy a picnic," she'd said that morning while buttoning her blouse. "The girls need the sunshine. We all do." Jessica, 12 years old and halfway between childhood and adolescence, rolled her eyes at the idea but secretly liked being outdoors. She carried a paperback book in her backpack, just in case the day got boring, and her MP3 player loaded with pop songs her mother didn't approve of. And Sarah, only 8, was all brightness. She tugged at her mother's sleeve as they crossed the grass toward the trees. "Can I let my balloon go? Just a little?" she begged, the red helium balloon bobbing against the sky, tied around her wrist with twine. Linda smiled, brushing Sarah's honey-blonde hair away from her eyes. "Not too high, sweetheart. We don't want it to fly away." The family settled on a patch of grass not far from the tree line. Robert unfolded the quilt, Linda began unpacking food, and the girls darted off to play. Jessica pretended not to care, but when Sarah ran too close to the riverbank, she shouted, "Careful!" Sarah twirled in her white cotton dress, sewn with tiny daisies, a gift from her mother just a week before. She laughed and spun, the balloon dancing wildly in the breeze. For a while, the world was ordinary. The radio, propped on the quilt, played faint country music. Robert cracked open a soda and leaned back with a sigh. "This is nice," he murmured. Linda adjusted her sun hat, watching the girls with the sharp-eyed vigilance only a mother knows. Jessica eventually stretched out on the quilt, flipping through her book. Sarah, restless, skipped to the tree line where the forest began, her shoes thudding lightly on the earth. Jessica lifted her head just long enough to call out, "Sarah, don't go too far." Sarah waved without looking back. "I won't," she called, but the trees seemed to draw her in. The branches whispered above her as she disappeared into the shade, her balloon tugging behind like a reluctant companion. Minutes passed before Jessica realized the meadow had grown too quiet. She sat up, brushing hair from her face. The spot near the trees was empty. No white dress, no bouncing red balloon. "Mom!" Jessica's voice cracked slightly. "Where's Sarah?" Linda glanced up from the sandwiches, her expression casual at first. Then she frowned. Robert was already pushing himself to his feet, his gaze narrowing toward the forest. "Sarah?" he called, voice loud, almost jovial at first. When there was no answer, he tried again, sharper this time. "Sarah." Jessica stood, her chest tight. The air seemed to thicken. Linda dropped the knife she was using to spread mayonnaise and ran forward, her sandals slapping the grass. "Sarah!" she cried. The name cut the air like glass. The family rushed to the tree line. Branches swayed overhead, casting shifting patterns of shadow on the earth. There, caught on a low branch, the balloon string dangled, swaying in the wind. The balloon itself tugged against the bark, trapped, its bright color jarring against the greens and browns of the forest. But Sarah was nowhere. Robert charged forward, calling his daughter's name again and again, his voice hoarse with panic. Linda darted left and right, scanning the underbrush. Jessica's throat burned with unshed tears as she shouted until her voice cracked. No small footprints in the dirt, no sound of laughter or crying, just silence. The world shifted in that instant. The ordinary picnic dissolved into nightmare. The first call to the police was made within minutes. By the time the first patrol car pulled into the park, Linda was on her knees near the trees, sobbing. Robert spoke to the officer in a strained, clipped voice, explaining over and over that they had only looked away for a few moments. Jessica sat rigid on the quilt, staring at the balloon string still twisting in the wind, wishing she could pull time backward. Uniformed officers spread through the trees. Dogs were brought in within the hour, their handlers urging them into the woods. A helicopter thumped overhead as the afternoon shadows lengthened. Strangers gathered, whispering, their eyes flicking toward the distraught family as though tragedy were contagious. Jessica answered questions numbly. What had Sarah been wearing? Where had she last been seen? Did Sarah have any reason to run away? She repeated the same details until the words felt unreal. White dress with daisies. Red balloon. By the trees. She just walked in. By nightfall, the park was cordoned off with yellow tape. Flashlights pierced the woods. Officers shouted back and forth, their beams slicing the darkness. Jessica stood between her parents, clutching Linda's hand so hard her nails dug into the skin. No trace. The days that followed blurred into one another. Flyers bearing Sarah's school photo appeared on telephone poles and shop windows. Volunteers arrived with backpacks and flashlights, combing every trail in the area. Boats searched along the riverbanks. Television crews set up at the park entrance, capturing every grim update from the police chief. At home, Jessica lay awake at night listening to her parents' muffled arguments. Robert insisted they push the police harder. Linda said they had to trust the process. Both voices broke with exhaustion and grief. Jessica kept hearing her own voice, echoing from that afternoon. Sarah, don't go too far. A casual warning, one she'd said 100 times. Why hadn't she followed her sister? Why hadn't she gone with her? Every sound in the house reminded her of absence. Sarah's laugh no longer filled the halls. Her small shoes sat by the door, untouched. Her school backpack leaned against the wall, still holding notebooks and a library book due back the following week. Jessica found herself staring at the red balloon on the day the police returned it. An officer had untangled it from the branch, deflated now, wrinkled and dull. Linda folded it into a box along with Sarah's hairbrush, her drawings, and the daisy dress she had sewn months earlier. The family's life folded, too. Friends came with casseroles, neighbors brought flowers, but after a few weeks the visits slowed. People moved on. Jessica could not. She filled notebook after notebook with timelines, maps of the park, sketches of the tree line, notes about rumors she overheard at school. Some kids whispered that Sarah had been taken by a stranger. Others claimed she had fallen into the river and drowned unseen. Jessica wrote it all down, determined not to forget a single detail. She kept the silver star necklace Sarah had been wearing that day, the one her little sister had begged for at the jewelry counter months earlier. Jessica wore it tucked under her shirt, clutching it whenever guilt threatened to consume her. The balloon had floated away. The laughter was gone. And yet Jessica swore she would find the truth. In the weeks after Sarah vanished, the Mitchell household transformed into a place where time itself seemed broken. Morning bled into evening without distinction. Linda often forgot to cook. Robert wandered out at all hours, sometimes returning with mud on his shoes, sometimes not at all until dawn. Jessica, once lively and sarcastic, sat at the kitchen table with stacks of papers, maps, lists, scribbled notes. A 12-year-old trying to play detective. The police kept their distance after the first frantic month. They told the Mitchells that statistically, if a child wasn't found within 48 hours, the chances of recovery dropped to near zero. They said it kindly, but the words struck like a hammer. Linda wept silently in the bedroom after every briefing. Robert raged, punching the wall until his knuckles bled. Jessica overheard everything. She learned early how adults spoke in half-truths when they thought children weren't listening. The first false lead came in August. A woman in Springfield reported seeing a girl matching Sarah's description at a gas station. The family rushed there, hearts pounding. But the girl in question was 10, traveling with her aunt, and bore only a passing resemblance. People mean well, the detective said as he escorted the Mitchells back to their car. But memories play tricks. We follow up on everything. Jessica stared out the window the whole ride home, her nails biting into her palms. If adults' memories were so fragile, she would have to remember for all of them. By autumn, Jessica had created her first case board. She used her bedroom wall, pinning photographs of Sarah, smiling at the playground, blowing out birthday candles, holding her favorite stuffed rabbit, alongside a map of Alton Baker Park with red yarn tracing possible routes Sarah might have taken. Linda came in once and froze at the sight. "Sweetheart, maybe this isn't healthy." "I'm not taking it down," Jessica said, defiant. "Somebody has to find her." Her mother didn't argue further. Instead, she hugged Jessica tightly, her tears wetting her daughter's hair. School became unbearable. Teachers pitted her. Classmates avoided her. Some whispered cruelly, "Her sister's probably dead." Others avoided eye contact altogether, as though tragedy could be contagious. Jessica fought back the only way she knew, by writing. She filled diary after diary with notes about the investigation, transcripts of interviews she imagined conducting, theories about footprints and witnesses. By the time she was 14, she had compiled enough material to rival the official police file. When the police stopped calling, she started calling them. She demanded updates, asked if they had checked certain trails, if they had spoken to a camper who claimed to see a red balloon drifting deeper into the forest that day. The officers were polite at first, then dismissive. "Jessica, we appreciate your passion," one detective told her, "but you have to let us do our jobs." She didn't. The Mitchells fractured under the weight of loss. By the time Jessica turned 16, her parents slept in separate rooms. Robert buried himself in work, taking extra shifts and returning home late. Linda retreated into silence, sometimes staring out the window for hours. Family dinners became quiet affairs. Plates clinking, forks scraping, no conversation. Jessica often ate alone, poring over her notes. She had developed rituals, reviewing her timeline before bed, reciting Sarah's last known words like a prayer. She refused to let her sister's image fade. On the 5th anniversary of Sarah's disappearance, the family attended a candlelight vigil at the park. Strangers held signs reading, "Bring Sarah home." Reporters snapped photos. Linda wept openly. Robert kept his arm around her, his face stone. Jessica stood a few steps apart, clutching the silver star necklace and staring at the trees. She imagined Sarah still in there, waiting, calling out in a voice too soft for anyone but her sister to hear. College was supposed to be an escape, but Jessica turned it into an extension of her obsession. She majored in journalism, drawn to the idea of uncovering truths buried by neglect or corruption. While other students drank at parties, she spent nights in the library researching missing persons cases. She learned the patterns. Children taken by strangers, by relatives, by chance encounters. She studied survival stories, devoured manuals on forensic science, and even attended a seminar on investigative techniques. Her dorm room mirrored her childhood bedroom, walls plastered with maps, newspaper clippings, photographs of Sarah. Friends came and went, but few stayed. "You're intense," one roommate said before requesting a transfer. Jessica didn't care. Relationships felt frivolous compared to her mission. She did fall in love once, with a classmate named Mariah who admired her tenacity. But Jessica's late-night research, her constant focus on Sarah, eventually drove a wedge between them. "You're living in the past," Mariah said during their final argument. Jessica's reply was sharp, almost cruel. "My sister doesn't get a future. Why should I?" Every holiday carried its own weight. At Christmas, Sarah's stocking still hung by the fireplace. On Sarah's birthdays, Linda baked a cake she never ate. Jessica lit a candle in her apartment each June, whispering her sister's name into the flame. By the 10th year, Jessica had become something of a local curiosity. Reporters occasionally interviewed her about cold cases. She launched a blog documenting her search, filled with scanned documents and theories. Followers called her determined, brave, obsessed. She accepted all three, but privately, doubt gnawed at her. What if Sarah had died that day in the woods? What if she had wasted her life chasing shadows? Sometimes Jessica dreamed of Sarah calling from the forest, only to wake with her throat raw from shouting in her sleep. Still, she pressed on. There were other false leads. A homeless man claimed he had once seen a girl matching Sarah's description near the riverbanks. Police dismissed him as unreliable. A tip from Idaho suggested Sarah had been spotted at a rest stop, but it turned out to be another child. Each disappointment hit like a fresh wound. Yet Jessica refused to let go. She told herself that if she stopped searching, Sarah would be gone forever. By the 15th year, Jessica was 27, living alone in a cramped apartment stacked with binders and boxes labeled Sarah. She had a steady job at a small newspaper, writing human interest stories and crime reports. Colleagues respected her diligence, but none of them knew the depth of her obsession. Her apartment was a shrine. On the wall above her desk hung Sarah's last school portrait, the corners curling with age. Beneath it, the silver star necklace glimmered in the dim light. Jessica often sat there late into the night, tracing timelines with her pen, whispering promises into the silence. And then, one rainy Thursday afternoon, her phone rang. The caller ID flashed a familiar name, Daniel Harris, a childhood neighbor, once the boy who had helped her search the woods with a flashlight in those first frantic days, now grown into a drone technician. When Jessica answered, his voice trembled. "Jess, I think I found something." Rain slicked the windows of Jessica's apartment, streaking the glass with shifting patterns of gray. She had just returned from work, her damp coat draped over the back of a chair, when her phone buzzed on the desk. She almost didn't answer, another editor maybe asking her to cover a council meeting, but the name on the screen froze her in place. Daniel Harris. Jessica hadn't spoken to him in months, maybe a year. They had grown up side by side on the same cul-de-sac, shared childhood summers filled with bike rides and tree forts. When Sarah disappeared, Daniel had been one of the kids holding flashlights at the first community search, his face pale with fear. Over time, like everyone else, he had moved on. She answered cautiously. "Hello, Jess." His voice was shaky, breathless. I think I found something." Her pulse jumped. She gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean?" "I was out with the drone, doing a survey job for the Forest Service, near the Willamette, and Jess, I saw someone." The silence stretched as she processed his words. "Someone? A girl? Or, I don't know, maybe a woman, thin, pale, standing in the undergrowth just staring up at the drone. I recorded everything. You need to see it." Jessica's hands trembled. "Send it to me." Within minutes, an email arrived with the footage attached. She opened it, heart pounding, and watched. The drone camera soared above the dense canopy, mist curling between the trees. At first, it was just forest, endless green and shadow. Then, in a small clearing, movement. A figure. Jessica leaned closer, breath caught in her throat. The person stood almost motionless, hair hanging long and tangled, face lifted toward the sky. The eyes, wide and hollow, seemed to lock directly with the camera. She wore something tattered, color indistinguishable in the gray light. Her posture was oddly familiar, like a ghost Jessica had seen 1,000 times in memory. She rewound the clip, watched again. The tilt of the head, the smallness of the frame. "Daniel," she whispered into the phone, her voice breaking. "That looks like Sarah." The footage consumed her. She played it on loop until dawn, memorizing every pixel, every flicker of movement. The way the figure's shoulders sloped, the way she pressed her hand briefly to a tree trunk, as if for balance. It wasn't just a trick of light. It wasn't wishful thinking. Jessica knew her sister's body language the way she knew her own handwriting. The next day, Daniel brought over still images he'd pulled from the video. He spread them across her kitchen table like puzzle pieces. In one frame, tree bark showed faint markings. In another, the figure's hand touched a trunk where scratches formed crude letters. SM. Jessica's breath hitched. "Sarah Mitchell." Daniel nodded. "I thought it might be coincidence. But then I went back through some of the footage from earlier flights. Look at this." He handed her a photograph. Fresh barefoot prints in the mud, small but not childlike. Next to them, heavier impressions from boots. The room seemed to tilt around Jessica. For 15 years, she had begged the universe for a sign. Now suddenly there were too many. That night, Jessica couldn't sleep. She sat at her desk with the silver star necklace in her hand, staring at the photos. If you're alive, Sarah, I'll find you. She thought of all the birthdays missed, the years of silence, the empty chair at every dinner table. She thought of her mother's grief, her father's bitterness, her own obsession that had consumed every choice she had ever made. And now, after all this time, her sister was out there, alive. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Who had she been with all these years? Who wore the boots that tracked alongside her bare feet? Jessica didn't want to imagine the answer. 2 days later, she and Daniel hiked into the forest where he had flown the drone. The trees pressed close, damp moss softening every sound. Jessica carried a backpack filled with water bottles, a flashlight, and her notebooks. "Are you sure about this?" Daniel asked as they pushed deeper into the woods. "Absolutely," Jessica said, her jaw tight. "I've been waiting 15 years for this trail." They followed the coordinates from the drone footage. The ground was uneven, slick with rain. After an hour, Daniel stopped and pointed. There, on the bark of a broad fir tree, scratched letters gleamed pale against the dark wood. SM. Jessica's knees went weak. She touched the carvings, fingers trembling over the grooves. The marks were fresh, the wood still raw. "She was here," Jessica whispered. "She was here." Nearby, they found remnants of a camp. A patch of cleared earth, a rusted bucket, the blackened circle of a fire pit. Jessica crouched, lifting a strip of fabric caught on a bramble. Faded daisies dotted the cloth. Her breath caught in her chest. Her dress. Daniel knelt beside her. "Jess, this is incredible. But it's also scary. Whoever she's with, they've kept her hidden this long. That doesn't happen by accident." Jessica closed her hand around the fabric. "Then we'll find them. We'll end this." Further into the woods, they discovered something even stranger. A ring of stones, carefully arranged, with a weathered wooden horse placed at the center. Jessica's throat tightened. "Oh my God! What is it?" "It's from our grandfather. He carved it when we were kids. It went missing the day Sarah disappeared." She touched the small horse, its surface worn smooth. Daniel's eyes widened. "Then she's been carrying it all this time." Jessica swallowed hard. The forest around them felt alive, watching. Every broken twig, every echo of birdsong seemed like a message. Sarah had survived here. She had left a trail of herself scattered through the woods. But she hadn't been alone. Back in Eugene, Jessica confronted her mother. "Mom," she said, laying the photographs on the kitchen table. "I think Uncle Gregory knows something." Linda froze. Her hands trembled as she gathered the photos into a neat stack, as if tidying them could erase their meaning. "Jessica," she whispered, "there's something I never told you." Jessica's stomach sank. "What?" "Gregory was at the picnic that day. I didn't want to believe it mattered, so I never told the police. He said he didn't see anything. He swore." Jessica's pulse roared in her ears. "You hid this." "I couldn't. I didn't know what to do," Linda stammered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He's my brother. I thought he loved her." Jessica's hands clenched into fists. "And for 15 years, she's been out there with him?" Linda buried her face in her hands. For Jessica, the pieces began to click into place with sickening clarity. The boot prints, the hidden life in the woods, the secrecy. Her uncle had taken her sister, and Sarah was still alive. Jessica couldn't look at her uncle the same way again. Every family memory, every holiday dinner, every awkward hug when she was a teenager, all of it now draped in suspicion. She began to notice things she had once ignored. The way Gregory avoided eye contact when Sarah's name came up. How he lived on the outskirts of town, his house half swallowed by forest. How he never brought friends, never married, never really explained his work. Her mother's confession rang in her ears. He was at the picnic that day. Jessica's instincts, sharpened by years of obsessive research, screamed that this was no coincidence. On a gray Saturday morning, she drove to Gregory's house. Daniel insisted on coming along, worried she might do something reckless. but Jessica was adamant. "I just need to see," she said, gripping the wheel. "If there's nothing, then fine. But I can't ignore this." Gregory's property sat at the end of a gravel drive. The house was small and shabby, shutters sagging, porch littered with tools. But it was the photos inside that made Jessica's breath falter. Gregory welcomed them stiffly, his smile forced. He seemed smaller than she remembered, but his eyes, dark, calculating, hadn't changed. Jessica's gaze roamed the living room. Family photographs lined the mantel, though some frames were turned backward, glass reflecting light like blind eyes. Then she saw it. A picture of Sarah on Gregory's shoulders, her red balloon in the corner of the frame. Her stomach turned. "Funny," Jessica said evenly. "I don't remember you taking her out that day." Gregory's smile didn't reach his eyes. "It was just a photo. She liked being up high. Kids do." By the door, a pair of boots sat neatly on the mat. The same size, the same tread as the prints Daniel had photographed. Jessica's pulse hammered. She felt Daniel shift beside her. Tense. She forced herself to keep her voice calm. "She's alive, isn't she?" Gregory froze for half a second, just long enough for the truth to show in his eyes. Then he laughed, low and strained. "You've been chasing shadows for too long, Jess. It's making you see things that aren't there." Jessica didn't argue. She couldn't. Her fury would give her away. Instead, she thanked him stiffly and left, Daniel at her heels. The moment they were back in the car, Jessica slammed her fist against the steering wheel. "It's him. I know it. He has her." Daniel exhaled shakily. "Then we need proof. More than photos and suspicions. Something solid." Jessica stared at the tree line beyond the house. Dark pines pressed close like a wall. "Then we go back into the woods." The next morning, they returned to the forest, this time deeper, guided by instinct and the faint trail of boot prints. Hours passed. The light shifted, shadows lengthening, air growing colder. Then Daniel stopped suddenly. He pointed ahead. Through the dense ivy and moss, half hidden by years of neglect, stood a cabin. Small, weather-beaten, smoke curling from its crooked chimney. Jessica's breath caught. Her skin prickled. They crouched in the undergrowth, watching. The windows were boarded, but through a narrow gap, the drone's camera slipped easily. Daniel maneuvered it with steady hands, eyes fixed on the screen. Jessica leaned in. The feed flickered, then sharpened. Inside, the cabin was dim. A figure moved in the shadows. Long hair tangled, skin pale, eyes enormous in the gloom. She pressed her hand against the window as the drone buzzed past, leaving a smear of condensation. Jessica's heart lurched. It was Sarah, 15 years older, frail but unmistakably Sarah. Jessica clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle the sob rising in her throat. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, imagined it in 1,000 different ways. But seeing her sister alive, real, within reach, it was almost too much to bear. On the drone feed, Sarah bent down, scratching letters into the wooden wall with a sharp fragment of stone. When she stepped back, Jessica's initials stood clear, JM. The message was undeniable. She remembered. She still knew her sister. Daniel's voice was low, urgent. "Jess, we can't just storm in there. Gregory's dangerous. We need the police." Jessica shook her head fiercely. "I can't leave her another night in there. Not now. Not after this." They argued in whispers, crouched behind the thick ferns, until a sound cut through the forest, heavy footsteps, crunching leaves. Gregory. He emerged from the trees carrying firewood, his movements methodical, his jaw set. He didn't glance toward the cabin, but his very presence radiated control. Jessica's fury boiled, but she stayed still, gripping Daniel's arm until the man disappeared inside. Her mind raced. Timing would be everything. "We wait," she whispered, "until he leaves again." The hours stretched painfully. They huddled in silence, rain dripping from the canopy. Finally, near dusk, Gregory stepped out once more, muttering under his breath, and disappeared into the trees with an axe slung over his shoulder. Jessica's heart thundered. Now. They crept forward, pried loose a board from the window. The wood screeched softly, splinters cutting their hands, but the gap widened. Inside, Sarah looked up, startled. Then recognition lit her eyes. Tears welled instantly. "Sarah," Jessica whispered, her voice breaking. "It's me." Her sister stumbled forward, frail but determined, pressing her hand through the gap. Jessica grasped it desperately, overwhelmed by the warmth of her touch. With Daniel's help, they widened the opening. Sarah crawled through, her body trembling, breath shallow, but her spirit unbroken. Jessica wrapped her arms around her, sobbing. 15 years of silence shattered in that moment. "I knew you'd come," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I never stopped looking," Jessica choked. But the reunion was cut short. A shout echoed through the trees. Gregory's voice, furious, ragged. He was back. Daniel had already dialed the police, speaking in low, urgent tones. Jessica tightened her grip on Sarah, pulling her behind as Gregory stormed into the clearing. His face twisted with rage, but also resignation, as though he had always known this day would come. The sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder. Gregory stopped in his tracks, staring at the three of them. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Then, without a word, he sank to his knees, hands on his head, as the police burst into the clearing. Sarah was safe. At last. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and faint lavender air freshener, a strange combination that clung to Jessica's clothes as she paced the hallway outside Sarah's room. Reporters were already gathering outside the building, cameras flashing, voices clamoring for details. Headlines blared across the internet. "Missing girl found alive after 15 years in Oregon forest." Jessica had been chased for comments, microphones thrust at her face, but she refused to let the world make a spectacle of Sarah. Her focus was only on her sister. Inside the room, Sarah lay propped against pillows, her body frail beneath the thin hospital blanket, and 4 drip fed into her arm. Her hair, wild and matted when they found her, had been gently brushed and trimmed. But it was her eyes that told the real story. Eyes too old for her 23 years. Eyes that had seen far more than any child should. Jessica sat beside her, holding her hand. "You're safe now," she whispered. Sarah's lips curved into the faintest smile. "I almost forgot what safe feels like." The days blurred. Doctors checked her vitals constantly, measuring the toll of years of malnourishment and isolation. Therapists sat with her, speaking softly, encouraging her to describe her experiences. Sometimes Sarah opened up. Sometimes she went silent, staring at the wall as if still listening for Gregory's footsteps outside the cabin. Jessica stayed with her through it all. She brought old photographs, shared stories, played the country music their parents used to hum during picnics. Slowly, Sarah began to respond, her voice growing stronger, her laughter fragile but real. One evening, Jessica gave her the silver star necklace. "I kept this for you," she said, fastening it gently around Sarah's neck. "All these years, I never let it go." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She touched the pendant as though it were the most precious thing in the world. "I thought you forgot me," she whispered. "Never," Jessica said fiercely. "Not for a single moment." Meanwhile, the rest of the Mitchell family wrestled with emotions too heavy to carry. Robert, their father, arrived at the hospital after nearly collapsing when he first heard the news. He wept openly the moment he saw Sarah, clutching her hand as though to make up for 15 years of absence. Linda hovered nearby, torn between relief and crushing guilt, her confession about Gregory still fresh. Sarah forgave her mother with a grace that astonished Jessica. "You didn't know?" she said softly, resting her hand on Linda's. "You were hurting too." But forgiveness did not erase the shadows. Gregory's arrest fractured what little remained of the family's sense of stability. His motives remained unclear: control, obsession, perhaps even delusion. He said little during questioning, his silence infuriating investigators. Some speculated he believed he was protecting Sarah from the world. Others thought he had wanted a family of his own, twisted into something monstrous. Jessica refused to waste her energy on him. Her attention was on Sarah. The media storm intensified. Journalists swarmed the hospital, clamoring for interviews. Talk shows speculated endlessly about Sarah's survival, about the miracle in Oregon. Jessica shielded her sister from it all. "They don't deserve your story," she told her. "Not until you're ready." Sarah nodded, grateful. For too long, her life had been controlled by someone else. Now she would choose when and how to speak. Weeks passed. Sarah grew stronger. She learned to navigate the world again. The hum of traffic, the glow of screens, the endless choices of food in a cafeteria. Each new experience overwhelmed her. But Jessica stood by her side, steadying her through every step. One evening, after a particularly difficult therapy session, Sarah sat with Jessica on the hospital balcony. The air smelled of jasmine, heavy with the warmth of summer. "I used to carve your name," Sarah admitted quietly. "On trees, on wood, anywhere I could. I thought, if I left enough of you in the forest, maybe you'd find me." Jessica's chest ached. "And we did. We found you." Sarah leaned her head against her sister's shoulder, the silver star necklace glinting in the fading light. "You never gave up." "Never will," Jessica said. When Sarah was finally discharged, the family gathered in their backyard. The old picnic table had been repaired, lanterns strung in the trees. It was simple, quiet, intimate, nothing like the chaos outside their walls. Jessica watched as Sarah stepped barefoot onto the grass, inhaling deeply as if reclaiming the world. Linda placed a plate of sandwiches on the table, her hands shaking. Robert fiddled with the radio, tuning it to a faint country station, the same one that had played 15 years ago. For a moment, time seemed to fold in on itself. The laughter of children chasing balloons seemed to echo faintly, not in memory, but in possibility. They sat together, not speaking much, but words weren't necessary. Presence was enough. Later that night, Jessica and Sarah sat alone, the stars scattered above them. "You know," Sarah said, tracing the silver pendant with her finger, "he tried to make me forget. Told me you'd moved on, that you didn't care." Jessica's throat tightened. "I cared every day. I built my whole life around finding you." Sarah smiled faintly. "I knew. Deep down, I knew you hadn't given up." They sat in silence, the bond between them stronger than words. Years had been stolen. Wounds would take time to heal. But as the night air wrapped around them, heavy with the scent of jasmine, one truth remained undeniable. They had found each other again, and love had endured.